Welcome to Improvisational Pie Making 101. Steve is directing this and has been guiding me through the preparations. My role is to guide you through the preparation of an apple pie, as I understand it. First, a disclaimer. I would recommend highly a cookbook. This is the way I learned. The Betty Crocker Picture Cookbook is an ideal choice, and the pages that you're going to want are page 298, 299, and the picture of the entire process on page 300 and 301. So with that, I think we probably can begin. It's always helpful to have what you need all in one place. I would be lying if I said I did that at all times. But it does simplify the process. Basic ingredients for the crust are flour, shortening. Actually, the very best is lard, but you can't really get that anymore, and it's probably even less healthy, so I would skip lard. Flour, shortening, a little bit of salt. You're going to need a pastry blender, a fork to stir it, and you're going to need to pull a little ice water out of the refrigerator just to make it all stick. The recipe calls for a 9-inch pie for 2 cups of flour, and it should be sifted. I never sift, so you can suit yourselves on sifting or not sifting. I also don't measure, so this is probably going to be a little awkward for all of us. This is a 1/2 cup. 1 cup, 1.5 cups, 2 cups, and I think I'm going to do a little extra because if you need a little extra crust for repairs, it's good to have it. So I'll put another maybe big 1/4 cup in. And don't put this away because you'll be needing it for your pastry cloth. Then you want about a teaspoon of salt mixed in with the flour. I think the salt area is quite forgiving, so don't worry about precision too much. And then for shortening, it calls for a large 2/3 cup if you're using hydrogenated shortening, which this is. And I'm not going to monkey around with the measuring cups because they're hard to clean, so I think you can probably pretty much judge after you've done this once or twice, but if you're doing it for the first time, you can measure. And because there's a little extra flour, you're going to need a little extra shortening as well. So we'll see how that goes. Then you can stir up the flour part a little bit without getting into the shortening, just to disperse the salt. And then you use your pastry blender. It suggests that you put that 2/3 cup in 1/3 at a time and cut the first 1/3 cup in to a very fine blend, which they tell you is for tenderness, and then cut the second 1/3 cup in more coarsely. Generally speaking, I just plain cut it all in. But again, you can probably improve on this product, and then you can do this next time. The other thing is it doesn't really pay to get too uptight about the crust because you can always patch the bottom. And believe me, we had many patched pie crusts when I was starting to do this. And no one ever knows because there's fruit on top of it. To the refrigerator for some ice water. And this does have a measurement. calls for 4 tablespoons. Again, you'll have to judge based on the handleability of it. This will be a little more than 4 because there's a little more flour and shortening. And then with just a fork, you stir it up and see if it starts to clump together. Which it is doing. Well, I think that'll do it. Maybe just a dab more. Okay, it's coming together in larger clumps. It sticks to the fork, and you can kind of see from what comes off the fork that it is malleable. So we will proceed over to step, whatever that step would be. A couple of words about equipment. When you're choosing pie plates, bakeable glass is a good choice. A dark colored pie pan is a good choice because the bottom crust browns better. If you have something shiny, it just doesn't work quite as well. You will absolutely need, I believe, a pastry cloth. I had one that actually stayed in place. It had room for wooden bars along the sides, and I used that to death. And when the flour was falling through huge holes, I got this one. So this is kind of my new pastry cloth. It does slide around a little, but it also does work, and it gives you sizes, which is helpful. You're going to have a rolling pin and a little stocking for the rolling pin. And you're going to want to flour the pastry cloth, hence the flour is still here, and then roll the rolling pin into the flour and rub that in. That kind of prevents the crust from picking up more flour while you're rolling, and that preserves tenderness. So you spread it around and roll it around to about the size you think you're going to be needing. And you may have to replenish the flour along the way depending on how many times you roll. And you do want to rub it in a little bit. You also don't want the crust to stick to the stocking, so that should be good. And then you try as best you can to divide your pie crust. You gather it together and then divide it not quite in half. You're going to want a big half and a not so big half. And you just work it like a snowball, and don't be afraid of it because it is quite forgiving. I'm guessing that'll be the big half. Obviously, clean hands are an essential here, but I know mothers have told children that many, many times over many, many years. The cookbook will tell you to make one large ball and then cut it not quite in half. I really haven't done that. Sounds like a good idea. Maybe next time I will. But you take the larger of the two. I'm not sure which of these would fit that category. And flatten it in the middle of where you're going to roll with your hand a little bit. You want to keep the edges of it as round as possible. And you really should let it sit. for a minute then, just to kind of rest. If you look at the little round dough patty here, you will see that there are some little white shortening elements that you can distinguish, but that really doesn't matter because when you roll it, it all blends. And you don't want to roll too hard, and you want to roll in a lot of directions. And you can see that the cloth is sliding a little bit, but c'est la vie. And it's cracking here. You want to keep it together as much as you can. And if necessary, you can always patch it. You can also kind of suit yourself with the thickness. Generally speaking, I like mine a little on the thin side. And you can judge whether you've got enough here, which I do. Now there's going to be a little trouble over here, but it should be on the rim part, so maybe it won't be a big deal. And then you cut your circle. Save the scraps. As I said, there may be patching ahead. And then to transfer it to the pie plate, the easiest way, oops, a little thick over here, is to just roll it up. Put a knife under the far edge. I don't know if you can see that. And just roll it up onto the rolling pin. You can kind of firm it up as you go along. And then lift it carefully. Throw the pie plate under it. And unroll it, and you can see that we are having difficulty here. You really don't want to handle it more than you have to either, because the more you handle it, the tougher it gets. But I think that'll work to put the apples into. And then we will refresh the flour a little bit. You may find occasionally that there'll be pie crust stuck on your little stocking here. Don't worry about it, just pull it off and proceed. And you repeat the process, obviously, with this. And it has been resting, so I think we can just move right along. Generally, the top crust works best if it's a little thinner than the bottom crust, but if you're uncomfortable about handling it, a thicker is stronger, so you might want to have it a little thicker the first couple times you do it, if you haven't done it before. And nobody will complain if you have leftover pie crust, because you can always haul out a cookie cutter, cut out some shapes, put them on a cookie pan, brush a little butter on them and sprinkle them with cinnamon sugar and bake them. And people become very pleased with that. Okay, so we are now at the point of peeling the apples while this just sits here. There's an infinite variety of apples suitable for pies, and most people that sell apples can tell you what the good pie apples are. And mixing them is not a bad thing because you kind of intensify the flavor sometime, so that one might be more tart and the other a little more sweet. One a little mushier as it cooks and another one that holds its shape a little better. So it just kind of makes for an eclectic pie. This is a Granny Smith, which is what I generally use when apples in Wisconsin are not in season. I believe these come from Australia. Cortlands are good pie apples, and so are Duchess. This happens to be a Cortland. They do come smaller. This one is an Ida Red, and you can see it has a nice red area in it. It's really a little sweet tart. It's very good. And this is a Macintosh, and the Macintosh will cook down more, so you won't have the definable slices with the Macintosh. They're more the applesauce type of apple. But in combination, they work really, really well. And with some experience, you will know which ones are going to turn brown the first. And so generally I peel those last. I can't remember which turns brown the first. So we will just start with the Macintosh. And you'll have to make allowances for arthritis because this is getting hard for me to do. You want the skin to be as thin as possible because there's a ton of flavor close to the skin. And if you do a thick peel, you've lost a lot of that. Let's try the Ida Red. This is a little softer apple, and you can see it's peeling a little more easily. Determine how many apples you're going to need for purposes of a video like this, because it depends on the depth of the pie pan. A deep dish pie will obviously take more. The size of the pie pan, you can have 8, 9, 10-inch pie pans. We have 11 apples here, some large, some small, and that should be, I believe, a great plenty, but we will slice them in a bowl and evaluate the amount. Thin slices are usually the best, but if you have an apple like a Macintosh that cooks up to be a little mushy, you can slice them a little thicker. And I don't like to have the little cellulose thingy that protects the seeds, so I always try to cut that out. Now that one. And that's a little on the thick side, maybe. I also don't waste much of the apple. If you make a little triangular slice at the top, you can get the good apple above the center seeds, and that kind of makes the filling blend a little better too. Apples have been peeled. For a 9-inch pie, the recipe will tell you you need 6 or 7 cups of sliced apples. We're not measuring, we're just dumping. And I think we're going to have enough here for 2 pies at the rate we're going. If you have really juicy apples, and you can tell when you're peeling them, you can mix a little flour in with your apples and your sugar and your cinnamon, and that will thicken the filling up a little bit, but I don't think I can ever recall having had to do that. And it's nice if you want to take the time and the apples aren't browning too rapidly. You can arrange them in lovely concentric circles and makes for a beautiful arrangement at this point, but once you've got the cover on, or the top crust, it's hardly worth the effort. But they will cook down, so you do want to be generous with your apples, because that's what it's all about. And those little pieces that we talked about can usually tuck in the little crevices. Depending on the tartness of your apples, and this is sort of a guesstimate, you're going to want about a cup of sugar. If you're making a green apple pie, and those are my personal favorites, this is not a green apple pie, you're going to need more sugar, but you're going to get a real burst of flavor. So that's a quarter of a cup. This would be a half a cup. And I don't think I'm going to need a full cup, so maybe a short quarter here. That's probably enough. And then you just dump a little cinnamon on top if you like. It calls for a teaspoon for a 9-inch pie. If you like a lot of cinnamon, you can put more on. I just usually cover the sugar with a little layer of cinnamon. And then put some little pats of butter. This is a little more than 1 tablespoon. But we'll see how it goes. And again, you can tuck these in the little crevices. Or does it look bare? Well, not to get too fuss budgety with it. Okay, and the tricky part approaches. Again, you want to cut a circle, and I like to make it as big as possible based on how your rolling went. You can always trim it down afterwards, and you probably will. And then once again, I think we can remove the messy part. All right, then you're going to look at your pie crust and see how much you've got hanging over. You want enough to flute the crust but you don't want so much that it ends up crust city on every piece of pie. And it may be a little short over here, but we'll give it a try. What you do then, and I don't know how best to show this, is you put the two pieces together and roll them up. Now this top crust has been sitting here a little long, so it's a little on the dry side. Ideally, it'll just roll right up, and you can pinch it together. And you may have to push the odd apple out of the way. Good time to turn on the oven. The cookbook calls for baking it at 425. I have baked all mine at 375 for these many years. So today I compromised and I've got it set at 400. It's also a new oven, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. Hopefully everything is tucked up now, but then you want to go around and pinch it high. You'll see the reason for that in a minute. It seals the inside better, but it also makes it easier to flute. And where it's too high, you can cut it off. Then what you can do is this is generally the method I use, you can use fork tines and just push it down. But if you push in with one finger and twist it, like so, you have the standard fluted pie crust. And what you're going to do after that is go around here where it's too thick and just cut it off so that you don't have a huge crust in the back of your pie. And right this area is where it looks the best, and that's the way it's supposed to look. It may not look like that all the way around, but I doubt very much if people will complain. And then just to even it up, it makes it look a lot better if you just take a knife around the outer edge. This is not a tidy job, as the countertop will testify. Then generally, just for fun, you need some slits for the steam to escape, and I like to just do a little outline of an apple. If you're doing a bunch of pies of different kinds, this will tell you what's in it. Not the best. And then you can just do a couple more little steam escape things. Sprinkle a little sugar on it, and it's good to go. When it comes out of the oven, it'll be a ton flatter than this, which leads to the next point. Before it goes in the oven, be sure, especially if you have a really full fruit pie like this one, to use a drip catcher. I'm not sure what the official name is, and you can tell from the looks of it that this has caught a lot of drips. But put this on the bottom shelf of the oven right underneath the pie, and you'll save yourself a lot of oven cleaning. So I think that's about it. And you bake it. The recipe will tell you how long. I'm not sure myself because it is pretty full. But the top should brown, the filling should be bubbling. You can probably hear it. And if you're not sure whether it's done, you can take a toothpick and stick it through one of these sliced areas and push it down, and if it encounters no resistance, your pie is finished. So, Apple Pie 101. Enjoy the holiday. The oven has been preheated. It's about 400 degrees at this point. I'm going to put the drip catcher on the very bottom shelf. Right under where the pie will be. Then bring the pie. Before I put it in the oven, these are very useful things to have. They're pie crust shields, and if it takes longer for the filling to bake on any kind of pie, and the crust, the outer crust begins to get too brown, which can very easily happen, the pie shield can then go on top to keep it from getting any browner. And it's just a very handy thing to have. And you should also have something to put the pie on when it comes out of the oven hot, especially if you have an oven top that's a little tricky to clean. So with that, it's in the middle shelf and on its way. Rated 50-minute baking time. I did check it. Put the crust guard on it to keep it from over browning, and lowered the temperature to 375. So depending on what your pie is doing, you may want to make a few adjustments. Pies are very forgiving. Time to check the pie again. The top is flattened out a little bit, and that can be a clue. Good, I mean, as in done.
Which needs to end by the end of the month, or else the government will shut down. Aaron McPike is joining us from Capitol Hill right
Yep.
now. Aaron, we just turned
Good to go.
within the majority with Kevin McCarthy emphasized that because it has been a bipartisan vote. Technically, he may be correct, but not really all that bipartisan.
That's right, Wolf, and that's because just two Democrats.
Really good.
How is it?
Very good.
What else could he say?
That was a waste of money.
Isn't strong enough?
Okay,
Thank you.
now we'll get your daughter outside and you can tell her what you really think.
Total waste of
It's
money.
good, right?
It works for me, so.
Now what?
So if you got any use for something with a hole in it that doesn't fit anything.
Long day at church.
I said, how are you doing? I'm tired.
More so than most, so have a good nap.
Will do.